Syria is kicking Russia out of their country, and it is changing the power dynamics in the Middle East. For over a decade, Moscow played kingmaker in the region, propping up the Assad regime and locking down strategic military bases. But now Russia's Middle East empire is crumbling. The newly established rebel-led Syrian government has just slammed the door on Russian forces. After hedging their bets on Bashar al-Assad's regime through years of civil war, Moscow now finds itself at odds with the new Syrian government, which just canceled a 49-year operational lease to use the port of Tartus, which might as well mean the end of Russia's long-term naval presence in the eastern Mediterranean. The first signs of trouble came in the first week of January this year when a Russian cargo ship was denied access to the Tartus naval base, blocking the evacuation of critical military equipment. The timing couldn't be worse for Russia. The war in Ukraine has already stretched it thin, and losing Syria as an ally, plus its bases there, will weaken its influence in the Middle East and Africa. For years, the Tartus naval base and Khmeimim air base were key to Russia's regional power. These bases helped Moscow expand its influence in Africa and its alliance with Iran. But Assad's sudden fall in December 2024 changed everything. It shifted the relationship between Russia and Syria. Since then, Russia has been in a frenzy, scrambling to withdraw military assets, dismantle air defenses, and relocate over 100 truckloads of equipment to Tartus for evacuation. However, with limited access to these bases, Russia's evacuation efforts are bottlenecked, leaving hundreds of trucks of equipment and personnel stranded. While the Khmeimim air base remains operational for now, its capacity to handle large-scale evacuations is limited. The Syrian withdrawal in some way officially marks the loss of Russia's credibility as a dependable ally. What's worse is that the implications don't stop with Russia. The vacuum left by Moscow's weakening presence could shift alliances and destabilize the fragile balance of power in the region. Back to this naval mess, a big challenge for Russia is how to deal with being expelled by a former ally. Efforts were made to evacuate its forces. Sensing that their time in Syria was up, Moscow had made preparations for a quick exit, dismantling key installations like air defense radars with huge military convoys spotted fleeing the Syrian capital headed for Tartus. But the Syrian government wasn't having it, and they blocked access to the port. This action left a Russian cargo ship, Sparta II, drifting near Tartus for days, creating a serious problem for Russia as it had planned to use the ship to move critical military equipment out of the base. The plan was simply to evacuate these resources via the Sparta II cargo ship and many more like it. But with the ship unable to dock, the operation was forced to stop, leaving the equipment and personnel stranded at the base. This has created a logistical nightmare for Russia, as it now faces a serious challenge in getting its resources out of Syria. As a solution, Russia turned to the Khmeimim air base, which is still under its control, as an alternative evacuation route. However, this base has its own problems. Limited access and outdated infrastructure make it difficult to manage the large-scale evacuation needed. Russian flights continue to operate from Khmeimim, but the base simply can't handle all the equipment and personnel that need to be moved. The initial blockage of Tartus and the limited ability to use Khmeimim air base have put Russia in a tough spot. Without full access to Tartus, many valuable military assets remain stranded, and Russia's ability to exit Syria in an orderly fashion is becoming increasingly complicated, as a limited number of vessels have been allowed to dock. Thanks for always supporting our content. Algorithm changes make it harder to reach more people with the truth, so please like the video and share it with your friends and family. Another factor making things harder for Russia is its limited control and access to the civilian section of the port it used to manage. This came by means of the cancellation of a contract between Syria's new government and a Russian company, STG Stroytransgaz, which was tasked with managing and operating Syria's Tartus port. The Tartus port is vital for Syria. It is the country's second largest commercial port after Latakia. Under former President Bashar al-Assad, a 2019 deal was made with the Russian firm STG Stroytransgaz, where it was to invest in and develop the port's infrastructure. The goal was to make the port run more smoothly and boost its commercial value. However, the Syrian government recently canceled the contract. It said the Russian company didn't meet the agreement's terms. The company was to improve the port's infrastructure, but it seems the Russian firm did not meet the agreed-upon standards or timeline. This failure has frustrated the Syrian government, and it is now distancing itself from the deal. The cancellation of the management contract and the port lease point to a bigger issue. The new Syrian authorities are not completely abandoning Russia, but they're kind of putting their relationship with Moscow on pause. Given Russia's long history of supporting Assad, it makes sense that the new leadership might be cautious about getting too close to Moscow. Using its presence in Syria, Moscow organized peace talks, brokered ceasefires, and built stronger ties with countries like Turkey and Iran. Without its presence in Syria, Moscow will find it harder to maintain its influence in diplomatic circles. For Russia, bases were more than just military tools. They symbolized Russia's role as a mediator and its ability to connect rival regional powers and add to its list of potential allies. Tartus and Khmeimim have been key military bases for Russia in the Middle East, playing major roles in the country's regional influence. Tartus gave Russia a strong naval presence in the Mediterranean. It was vital for controlling key sea routes and supporting military operations. These key bases played important roles. Khmeimim, in particular, provided vital air support for Russian and allied forces. This strengthened Russia's position in the region. It allowed it to compete with NATO nations. Tartus, a naval base, helped Russia expand into the Mediterranean. It supported missions in Libya, Mali, and Sudan. However, the situation has changed significantly. Russia's access to the Tartus base is now limited after being booted out. This severely restricts its naval operations in the Mediterranean. Russia still controls the Khmeimim air base, but its capabilities there have become restricted. This limits its ability to provide air support and project influence in the region. As Russia's grip weakens, the US and Turkey are stepping in. This increases competition and makes it harder for Russia to maintain its presence. This loss of strategic military access is not only a blow to Russia's power in the region, but also a heavy economic setback. It further complicates its efforts to maintain influence in the Middle East. Russia had already invested heavily in modernizing the Tartus port. It planned to spend another $500 million on upgrades to strengthen its presence in the Mediterranean. Abandoning these projects due to limited access is a significant financial loss. On top of that, Russia's economy is already under pressure from Western sanctions. These sanctions make it harder to fund such military plans. The cost of evacuating military equipment, rerouting supplies, and shifting resources only adds to the challenges. With these setbacks, Russia is facing a difficult situation in the Middle East. To stay relevant, Russia will need to rethink its military plans. It must find new ways to keep its influence, despite these economic and logistical problems. Russia's expulsion from Syria is a huge blow to its plans in the Middle East. Putin is finding it harder to keep Russia involved there while also dealing with the war in Ukraine. For the past 2 years, Russia has sent soldiers, weapons, and money to fight in Ukraine. This has stretched its resources thin. Balancing support for both Syria and Ukraine has become more difficult. The costs of fighting 2 wars have taken a toll. This has forced Russia to make alliances with countries like Iran and North Korea. With its influence in Syria now faded, Russia's power in the Middle East is shrinking. Moscow's ability to play a strong role in global politics is weaker than before. The war in Ukraine makes it hard for Russia to focus on anything else. This puts its bigger goals in danger. As the war in Ukraine continues, Russia is increasingly turning to countries like Iran and North Korea for help. The war is stretching Russia's military resources. This makes it harder to keep up with operations not just in Ukraine, but also in places like Syria, where it's being booted out. To cope with this, Russia has had to rely on North Korea for missile technology and extra manpower. It has also turned to Iran for its experience with military projects, especially drones. These countries have become important partners, providing Russia with weapons and supplies. However, this shift shows the bigger problems Russia is facing. It is becoming more isolated from the West and its usual allies. However, relying on Iran and North Korea is risky for Russia. Both countries face heavy sanctions and don't have the global power of the West or China. These countries can help Russia now, but their support is risky long-term. By depending on them, Russia is playing with fire. It is limiting its options and weakening its diplomatic position at the big boys' table. Relying on such isolated nations weakens Russia's global power. It increases its vulnerability in both military and diplomatic aspects. As Russia's ties to Iran and North Korea grow, its global influence shrinks. This makes it harder for Russia to remain a key world player. Russia's being kicked out of Syria is also a major blow to its arms sales and military industry. For years, Syria was used as a testing ground for Russian weapons. The war allowed Putin to boast and showcase his fighter jets, missiles, tanks, and air defense systems in real combat conditions. Many of these weapons were later marketed as battle-tested to buyers around the world. This made them more attractive. Countries like India, Algeria, and Egypt bought Russian weapons because they saw them perform well in Syria. Now, with Russia pulling out of Syria, it loses an important place to test and show off its latest military technology. This makes it harder to attract future buyers. Another issue is that access to Syria's borders and ports was key for shipping arms to the Middle East and North Africa. The Khmeimim Air Base and Tartus Naval Base played crucial roles. They allowed Russia to transport weapons to allies and warlords like Khalifa Haftar. They also helped militias in Sudan and Mali by using a shorter route from Syria to the Libyan port of Tobruk. Now that these bases are gone, Russia faces higher costs and logistical challenges in delivering arms. Without a secure base in Syria, it must find other, more expensive ways to move weapons. This could delay shipments and make them less reliable. The loss of Syria also damages Russia's reputation as a reliable arms supplier. Many countries buy weapons from Russia because they are cheaper than Western alternatives. They also believe Moscow can provide long-term support, maintenance, and training. However, with Russia suddenly forced out of Syria, it raises concerns among its customers. If Russia couldn't protect its own military bases, can it guarantee weapons deliveries and support in the future? This uncertainty may push some countries to look for other suppliers, such as China, Turkey, or Western arms manufacturers like the US and France. Additionally, Russia's military-industrial complex is already under pressure due to the war in Ukraine. Many of its weapons factories struggle to meet the Russian military's demands. The military is quickly using up tanks, missiles, and ammunition in Ukraine. Losing access to Syria means less business for Russia's defense companies. They miss out on contracts and revenue from Middle Eastern buyers. This makes their finances even tighter. This situation could lead to job losses in Russia's arms industry. Thousands of workers who rely on military production for their livelihoods may be affected. To make up for these losses, Russia is now looking to expand arms sales in Africa and Asia. But this won't be easy. The loss of Syria weakens its position in the Middle East. This makes it less competitive. Some buyers may switch to Western or Chinese weapons. They may see Russia as too distracted by the Ukraine war to focus on arms exports. In the long run, Russia's expulsion from Syria is a major setback for its weapons industry. It loses an important testing ground, an affordable arms shipment route, and a key market. Without its Syrian bases, Russia's arms exports will face more challenges. This will hurt both its economy and global influence. In response to these growing challenges in the Middle East, Russia is making a strategic shift. With its future in Syria doubtful, the country is scaling back its military presence in the region. It is relocating key assets to Africa, where it could set up its next proving ground for weapons. This move aims to establish a stronger military presence. This isn't just about pulling out troops anymore. It is a shift in focus and resources to maintain global influence. Russia has been reducing its military operations in Syria. It is reallocating assets to key African nations like Libya, Mali, and Sudan. Satellite imagery and flight records show Russian military equipment moving from Syria to these African countries. They highlight Russia's declining presence in the Middle East. The most significant signs of this shift are the increased activities at Russian bases in Libya and Mali. There has been more air traffic to these locations. This is due to Russian cargo planes like the Ilyushin Tu-76. Russia's growing presence in Africa signals its attempt to secure a new foothold. With its influence waning in regions like the Middle East, Russia is now eyeing Africa. It sees Africa as a land of opportunity with fewer rivals and strategic openings. Shifting focus to military operations in Africa presents significant challenges for Russia. Unlike its established presence in Syria, operations in Africa will require a much greater investment of resources. The continent is often marked by instability and difficult terrain. This makes military action more difficult to manage. While there are potential rewards, Russia's future success in Africa is uncertain. The logistical problems are huge. Africa is much farther from Russia than the Middle East. This means long and costly flights and sea journeys to move heavy equipment, weapons, and supplies. These lengthy supply routes and frequent refueling needs will strain Russia's resources. To further complicate Russia's military ambitions in Africa, one issue is its reliance on routes through NATO member Turkey. If Russian planes need fuel on their long flights to Africa, Turkey could freeze them out. It could block their access to airspace or set restrictions. This would cause delays and higher costs. Russia already faces financial struggles from sanctions and economic issues. Sustaining these operations could worsen its budget. On top of travel issues, many African countries Russia wants to work with are unstable. Nations like Libya, Mali, and Sudan face conflicts and instability. Russian troops in these countries don't guarantee success. The unstable politics in these nations could hurt Russia's influence. In short, Africa offers opportunities for Russia, but challenges may limit its success there. While Russia faces significant logistical and political obstacles in Africa, its challenges extend beyond the continent, particularly in the Middle East, where its relationship with Iran is undergoing some challenges. Both countries have worked together on several issues in the Middle East, particularly in Syria, where they supported the government of President Bashar al-Assad in the civil war. Iran seeks to maintain its influence in the region, while Russia sees Syria as a key part of its broader strategic goals. However, with the idea of Russia pulling out of Syria, their alliance could face serious challenges. Iran might view Russia's withdrawal as a betrayal, especially since Russia's military presence has been crucial in supporting Assad and helping protect Iran's interests in Syria. Iran has invested a lot in backing the fallen regime, and without Russia's help, it could be harder for Tehran to maintain its influence in Syria with the new government now in charge. Losing Russia as an ally would be a big blow to Iran's regional strategy, leaving it more vulnerable to other powers in the area. On the other hand, the trust phase might start to fade, and Russia might start to be concerned about Iran's growing influence in Syria. According to a report from the Washington Institute, Iran's efforts to develop Arab tribal militias in eastern Syria are likely to accelerate once again. While both countries have shared goals, Russia may not always agree with Iran's aggressive approach, including its use of militias and its deep involvement in Syria to destabilize the region. Iran's actions could sometimes contradict Russia's broader interests. Russia may be concerned about Iran's increasing influence in Lebanon and Iraq, which border Syria. This shift could upset the balance of power and harm Russia's relationship with Iran. With Russia's reduced role in Syria, the two countries may start to drift apart. Their alliance might not work as well for both of them anymore, and their partnership could weaken. This could affect other areas where they work together. Russia has been a big supplier of advanced weapons to Iran, like air defense systems and military equipment. If their relationship weakens, Iran might struggle to get the same level of military support from Russia. This could push Iran to find weapons from other sources, which could change the balance of power in the Middle East and impact the region. Beyond Syria, the shifting dynamics between Russia and Iran could have ripple effects on Russia's broader geopolitical strategy, particularly in Africa. Moscow has been boosting its presence in Africa. This includes countries like Libya, Mali, Sudan, and the Central African Republic. In these countries, Moscow has built ties. It offered military support, security aid, and weapons. However, maintaining this influence is costly, both financially and logistically. With Russia reducing its role in Syria, it may need to redirect its military and financial resources. This could make it harder for Russia to keep its influence in Africa. In Libya and Mali, Russia's Wagner Group has helped secure its interests. A change in Russia's priorities could undermine these efforts. The Wagner Group, which operates in secrecy, might struggle with logistics. It could be tough to operate in many regions if Russia focuses on other urgent issues. This sudden and forced shift in priorities in Syria is not isolated. They have broader consequences for Russia's global strategy, especially as it seeks to balance its growing military footprint in Africa. Sanctions and the cost of its military operations in Ukraine and Syria have hurt the economy. It may struggle to support its activities in Africa. Political instability in African countries poses challenges for Moscow. This shift could weaken Russia's position on the continent. Moving military resources from Syria to Africa is a tough task. The Wagner Group and other Russian forces have been vital in supporting Russia's goals in Africa. They provide training and logistical support and engage in military actions in places like Libya and Sudan, where local governments face internal conflicts. However, Russia faces a big challenge in maintaining operations across multiple regions. Its resources are limited due to its commitments in Syria. If Russia shifts more focus to Africa, it could face significant challenges in maintaining its military strength there. Operating in Africa is expensive and difficult due to the continent's vast distances, rough terrain, and the need for constant supplies, transportation, and equipment. These logistical issues could stretch Russia's resources thin, especially since it's already engaged in a conflict in Ukraine. The pressure from the war might weaken its influence in Africa, leaving room for other global powers to step in. With fewer resources to support its military presence, Russia could find it harder to maintain its alliances in the region, reducing its role as a key player on the continent. Beyond military concerns, Russia's involvement in Africa also requires significant financial resources. Russia needs steady funding to maintain its influence and to fund infrastructure projects. It's hard to get this money due to economic strain from ongoing sanctions and the high costs of war. The Russian economy is struggling. Inflation and reduced trade make it harder to support operations in Africa. Russia's military operations in several African countries are costly. Maintaining troops and supplying arms are adding to its economic burden. This change lets other global players enjoy Russia's possible retreat. China, through its Belt and Road Initiative, has made substantial investments in Africa. It has funded infrastructure and trade projects. Turkey has increased its presence in Libya and Somalia. It has done this by forming military and political alliances. As Russia weakens, countries like China and Turkey and the US and Europe may expand their influence. This would further diminish Russia's standing in Africa. The world is watching Russia as its power in the Middle East declines. The US has taken full advantage of Russia's weakened position. On the 16th of December, Pentagon Press Secretary Major General Patrick Ryder said the U.S. can now carry out more anti-ISIS missions in Syria. This shows how Russia's struggles in one region can affect its influence in another. Ryder told reporters that one of the big factors that has changed in Syria is the airspace, in the sense that previously you had Syrian regime and Russian air defenses, which would preclude in many cases our ability or desirability to go into those areas to conduct anti-ISIS operations. It is a much more permissible environment now in that regard. Capitalizing on this development, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha visited Damascus on December 30th. Ukraine and the new Syrian leadership reportedly agreed on limiting Russia's military presence. Ukraine has developed close ties with Syria's rebel government, providing crucial support in their fight against Assad. Notably, Ukraine supplied war drones, significantly aiding the rebels' efforts during the uprising. The meeting between the two governments shows how alliances in the region are changing. For Moscow, the situation poses both practical and symbolic challenges. Russia's troubles extend far beyond Syria and the Middle East. Back home, a stubborn Ukraine is pinning down Russian forces in the ongoing war. The conflict is not going the way Putin had hoped. Now nearing its third year, the war has become a costly and bloody stalemate, with no clear victory in sight. Despite a 10,000-strong North Korean force backing them, Russian forces have not won decisively. In some areas, Ukrainian troops have even pushed them back, forcing a North Korean retreat in parts of the Kursk region. When looking at casualties, the human cost of the Russo-Ukrainian war has been staggering for Russia. Estimates suggest that 834,670 Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded. Many more suffer from psychological trauma. This makes the war highly unpopular among regular citizens. The financial cost has also been significant. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says, as of December 2024, Russia has spent over $200 billion on its war effort. The huge cost is straining the economy. The Russian economy is struggling to grow, and the ruble's value is fluctuating wildly. Despite the challenges, Putin remains committed to the war effort. He has framed the conflict as a response to Western aggression. He wants to protect ethnic Russians in Ukraine. Many Russians at home and in exile are questioning the war's purpose and the government's handling of it. Protests against the war have become more frequent. Demonstrators want an end to the conflict and greater accountability from the government. Putin's popularity has also taken a hit due to the war. His approval ratings, once consistently above 80%, have fallen to around 73.6%. Many Russians are frustrated with the lack of progress in Ukraine and the economic hardship caused by the war. Some people are starting to question Putin's leadership. They wonder if he is the right person to lead Russia through these tough times. The war has also had a profound impact on Russian society. Many families have lost loved ones, and the psychological trauma caused by the conflict will likely be felt for years to come. The war has also worsened existing social and economic problems, such as poverty, inequality, and access to healthcare. Russia's healthcare system is struggling to cope with the demands placed upon it. The system is underfunded and understaffed. Many hospitals and clinics lack basic equipment and supplies. The situation is particularly dire in rural areas, where access to healthcare is often limited. The welfare system is also failing to provide adequate support to those who need it most. Pensions are often inadequate, and many retirees are forced to live in poverty. The government has introduced reforms to improve the pension system, but they have been slow to take effect. Russia's failing healthcare system is devastating its troops in Ukraine. A severe shortage of army medics has left soldiers without care. This has worsened the already high casualty rate. Reports say Russia's military has had to recruit civilian medical staff to fill the gap, but many are inexperienced and unprepared for the harsh realities of war. Moreover, Russian troops have reportedly lacked medical supplies. They are short on tourniquets, painkillers, and antibiotics. This has resulted in unnecessary deaths and severe injuries, further demoralizing Russian troops. Some reports say Russian soldiers have had to use makeshift medical treatments. For example, they use tampons as bandages. The situation is dire. Some estimates say that 50% of Russian casualties in Ukraine are due to poor medical care. Despite these challenges, Putin is committed to preaching the message of a strong and prosperous Russia. It is unclear how he plans to achieve this vision. Russia faces even more challenges, as shown by backlash from the general public over its decision to evacuate from Syria. The state propaganda machine is working hard to shape the narrative around these events, as noted by Voice of America. Russian officials are calling the pullback a strategy. They say it will protect their forces and reduce risks. Russian President Vladimir Putin says leaving Syria is a strategy, not a failure. At his press conference on the 19th of December 2024, Putin said that Russia had achieved its main goals in Syria. These included preventing a terrorist enclave. He said Russia's intervention stabilized the region and helped Assad. In Putin's view, the withdrawal is not a sign of defeat, but a planned step in a successful mission. The Kremlin is framing the retreat to maintain its image as a global power. It claims its goals in Syria were met, and it is a key force in the region. This propaganda effort aims to prevent domestic and international criticism from undermining Russia's political and military standing. Many Russians have grown weary of the long-running conflict and its costs, so the government needs to show that its actions are calculated and in control. By presenting the evacuation as part of a larger plan, Moscow aims to maintain public support for its involvement in Syria. It also helps maintain the narrative of Russian strength and influence in the region, even as challenges to Russia's influence grow. Ultimately, the Russian government is working hard to manage public perception, ensuring that any setbacks in Syria are seen as temporary and strategically motivated rather than as signs of failure.